it is a great pleasure for me and for PRIO to welcome Yasir Arman, who is the Secretary General of the Sudan's People Liberation Movement North, and also the Secretary of External Affairs for Sudan Revolutionary Front. He will be the main speaker today. Yasir Arman will talk about the very important topic of the political future of Sudan. This is a country with which Norway and the Norwegian people have had a long-standing relationship. But following the secession of South Sudan and the outbreak of a new civil war in 2013, attention has been diverted to Sudan's neighbor in the south. Sudan is, however, also in a predicament, both politically and economically. Civil war rages in Darfur, South Kordofan and Blue Nile. Tension is increasing in Khartoum in anticipation of this year's presidential election. It is therefore a great opportunity for us to hear the views and perspectives from one person who is one of the main actors within this challenging situation. I'm also very happy to welcome Dr. Gunnar Sørbø, who is a senior researcher at the Christian Michelsen Institute, and who has dedicated much of his career to the study of Sudan and knows the political scene in Khartoum very well. He will comment on Yasir Arman's speech afterwards. Then we will open for a question and answer session, and we will close the seminar at around 3:30 p.m. I should also mention that Yasir Arman's presentation and Gunnar's comments will be filmed and made available on PRIO's webpage later, but we will turn off the camera during the question and answer session to facilitate a more open discussion. So, without more further ado, I think I will welcome Yasir Arman to give his presentation. Please give a great applause.
Well, thank you very much, Austin and Professor Gunnar. Thank you for having me today. And I would like to thank each one of you who are here today to listen to my presentations. And I hope it's going to be useful reflections on the critical situation that Sudan is passing through. And I would like first to express my gratitude to the Norwegian peoples and to the Norwegian government. The Norwegian people, they did a great job to Sudan when it was one Sudan, and to these two Sudans, to Sudan and South Sudan. They have been involving actively in the humanitarian situations, and the peoples of this country, they actually save many lives, millions of lives, thousands of lives in Sudan, in different parts of Sudan, through their active involvement in the humanitarian situations in Sudan everywhere. Again, through their active involvement in the peace building. And actually, when I came here, I'm privileged twice in this visit. One, to be given an opportunity to reflect on the situation in my country and the suffering of the Sudanese people, and to try to rally sympathy, support, solidarity to them. And again, I was privileged because I met a good Norwegian whom I have been meeting them throughout the years. For the last 25 years, I met a very good, dedicated Norwegian women and men everywhere in Africa, and they were really dedicated for peace building in Sudan, and they helped a lot. I really thank them, and I thank those who sacrifice a lot from the well-being of this country to help Africa, and in particular Sudan, and in particular the two Sudans. My presentation is going to be on the political landscape of Sudan, the new realities and the way forward. And I would like to be brief. I have written my presentation for those who want to go in details in it and to know the nitty-gritty of the presentations. And would like to give more time for the interactions and the present situation in Sudan is a very complex situations, and in the SPLM North, and in the Sudan Revolutionary Front, and in the Sudan Call group, we believe that the best solution for Sudan that can bring national consensus is to have a national constitutional conference. That is the best option to restructure, to democratize Sudan and to preserve its unity. And there are other solutions which I will come to, but I believe the best solution for the Sudanese are for all the stakeholders to sit together and to agree on a new path, on a new blueprint that will take Sudan to democratization, restructuring, that will build a Sudan on equal citizenship. As I came here, today is the 8th of January, 59 years ago, Sudan got its independence. It's one of the first African countries to get their independence. And throughout the history of these 59 years, there are many opportunities that were all wasted in the history of the Sudanese politics that could have built a better country, countries that have better resources, human resources and natural resources. So Sudan could have been a successful story. Sudan could have been a better story than it today, could have been one of the leading African countries to build peace and democracy and to give model to Africa. But unfortunately, those opportunities were wasted. They were wasted when 29 years ago, I decided to join the SPLM, the Sudan People's Liberation Movement. I decided to join the Sudan People's Liberation Movement because of the great call of late Dr. John Garang, of his vision of the new Sudan, because Dr. Garang was saying very simple fact that we Sudanese, instead of focus on what divides us, we should focus on what brings us together. It is not a problem that we are coming from the north and the south, Muslims or Christian, Arabs or African. What brings us together is Sudan. So let us build on our commonality and let us build a new Sudan. That Sudan is for everybody, that Sudan will recognize the diversity of Sudan. And by then, Sudan was 1 million square miles, and by then Sudan was a country which represents small Africa. In Sudan, by then, there was more than 570 different tribes, all the religions on earth, and more than 130 languages, 130 languages. And Sudan, its history goes back to more than 7,000 years ago. It is part of the Nile Valley civilization. It is one of the countries that contribute to the human civilizations. And in Sudan, since we are in Norway, actually Christianity reached Sudan before Norway and before the Scandinavian countries. And there was a Christian kingdoms in Sudan for more than 1,000 years. And when Islam came to Egypt and the Muslims tried to invade Sudan, and it was not possible, and they signed the Pact Agreement in 641. It took the Muslims 900 years, 9 centuries, to spread Islam into northern Sudan of today through peaceful preaching. And when Dr. Garang gave this great call that we should come together from all different walks of life, different tribe, different culture, different diversities. Let us build an organization that will unite Sudan on a correct parameters, on a wider parameters, rather than this very limited parameters that we are Arabs and we are Muslims, and that is it. And in a very diverse country. And Dr. Garang and the SPLM admitted that Arabism is important for Sudan, Islam is important as a religion. Equally, there are other realities. There are Christian, there are African believers, and there are different cultures of Sudan that need to be accommodated, reflected, respected. This call was not being given attentions. Again, from 1983, when the SPLM was formed, I decided to join the SPLM with many of my colleagues from northern Sudan. In 1984, Jafar Nimeri was by then the president of Sudan, sent late Tiny Rowland, the British millionaire, and Adnan Khajukji, the Saudi millionaire, to Dr. Garang, and Jafar Nimeri was offering Dr. Garang to be the vice president of Sudan and to rule South Sudan. And then Dr. Garang responded in 1984 that even if I accept to be the vice president and the governor of South Sudan, this will not resolve the problem of Sudan. The problem of Sudan is bigger than myself. It needs a solution for everybody. It needs an end for marginalization. And in 1984, as early as that, Dr. John Garang, a brilliant nationalist and a thinker, provided Jafar Nimeri with the solutions, and he told him, let us have a national constitutional conference for all the stakeholders. Let us discuss the past, the future of Sudan, and how we can move forward in building a country that is based on equal citizenship. This call was turned down. Then in 2014, last year, General Bashir, after all long these years, and after all this successive regime, General Bashir was calling for a national dialogue. The same call that was, and the same opportunity and the same proposal that was offered by Dr. Garang in 1984, and that could have preserved the unity of Sudan, and that could have built a new Sudan. General Bashir called for a national dialogue, which was braced by all the Sudanese political forces and by everybody, that let us go for a credible national dialogue. Let us agree on who is going to facilitate, what are the agenda, how the resolutions in this national dialogue are going to be taken. And this came after two major events, fundamental events that happened in Sudan. One, the secession of South Sudan. Southern Sudanese, they struggle and they sacrifice to be an equal citizen in Sudan. That was not possible, and the Sudan government, actually they choose the self-determinations, because in the IGAD declarations of principles, the IGAD, they were offering two solutions. Is either a secular state in Sudan that will give an equal citizenship for everybody, or a self-determination for South Sudan. So, because of the ideology and because of the political Islam agenda in Khartoum, those of Khartoum, they prefer the political Islam rather than the unity of Sudan. And they choose the path, and they choose the options of the self-determination rather than agreeing on a secular state that is built on equal citizenship. In any case, after General Bashir gave his call, there was an important resolutions for the African Union, and that came after a long struggle, that we need two things. We need a holistic approach that will end the war at an entry point for the national dialogue, and the other is to have a preparatory meeting for all the political forces, including the government in Addis Ababa. And they were both rejected by the government. I'm also the chief negotiator of the SPLM North. And I know what took place in the last 9 rounds of negotiation in Addis Ababa. The government, they want to pursue the piecemeal solutions instead of the holistic approach. And they refuse adamantly, they want to separate between the issue of Darfur in ending the war and the 2 areas. And they want to confine the 2 areas only to the 2 areas. And we should not mention anything on the national level. And it is known to everybody that the problem of South Sudan, that's what Dr. Garang was saying in 1983, that the problem of South Sudan is not a problem of South Sudan. South Sudan per se has no problem. It is a problem of Sudan, in South Sudan. And again, today it is a problem of Sudan in the 2 areas. It is a problem of Sudan in Darfur. Darfur by itself has no problem. The problems of Darfur are being exported from the center. It is a problem of socio-political, economical, cultural marginalization. The refusal of recognizing the different cultures. My brother here, and I think he's from the Sudan embassy, when he greeted me, he said, my name is Onur. And I said, Onur Dabaiwa. He's from Eastern Sudan. And the Bija language is, the Bedouin language is one of the oldest languages on earth. Actually, it is older than the English and the Bijas, they are part of the Belamis during the Pharaoh period and during the black civilizations in Egypt. But yet the Bija language is not recognized in Sudan. The Bijas themselves are not recognized. They are the most poor people on earth. Nobody recognizes their culture, nobody. And I was there in Eastern Sudan together with my friend and my brother, Dr. Sharif Harir, who is here. We have been working together in Eastern Sudan. So now, the 2 big realities, the secession of South Sudan. The other reality is the genocide that committed against indigenous and important nationalities in Sudan. Those 2 big realities are being committed under the rule of General Bashir. But again, there is also new realities that emerging from the Sudanese political situation. Those realities, one of them, that the marginalized forces, they united themselves under the banner of the Sudan Revolutionary Front. And then again, we reach out to the other political forces. We signed a Paris Declaration with Sadiq al-Mahdi, the former Prime Minister in Paris, and we signed recently in Addis Ababa on the 3rd of last month, of December, we signed a great agreement called Sudan Call that bring all the major political forces, the National Consensus Group and the Ummah Party, the civil societies, and the SRF. This is a big bloc. This bloc is coming clearly, changing the balance of forces in Sudan and giving a clear message to President Bashir that there is 2 ways to go. It's either for you to change or you are going to be changed. There is no other ways. You have ruled Sudan for 26 years. You have committed genocide. The South Sudan has seceded under your rule. Those are big issues. Any one of them can change any government anywhere. So we need a peaceful transformation. And as I started, we need a national constitutional conference, a national constitutional process, a national dialogue, that all the Sudanese stakeholders are agreeing in the opposition, not only in the opposition, within the National Congress itself, within the Islamic movement, we are witnessing new realities emerging, that there is a discontent within the Islamic movement. I think 3 days ago, you have seen the amendment that General Bashir did in the constitutions and where those amendments are leading. Those amendments are leading Sudan from not only one-party system, it is one-man rule. That is what taking place in Sudan. They ruin the judiciary, the Janjaweed force, the rapid deployment force, now it become part of the regular forces due to this amendment. The security is being given executive power to do everything. We are interested in the national dialogue, but General Bashir is interested in the elections, and I believe he is going to do the elections. I must, though there is question of time, but I must touch on the humanitarian situation. The humanitarian situation, and those are the statistics of the United Nations. Last year in Darfur alone, there are more than 400,000 being displaced. In the two areas, more than 100,000. This is not my statistic. This is OSHA statistic from New York. And this comes as a result of using the militias, higher militias by the government. And those higher militias now in the amendment which took place 3 days ago are becoming a regular force, are being used officially by the government. Then there is a denial of access. In the two areas in Zunuba Mountain and Blue Nile, for the last 3 years, there is no access, and denying access is a war crime in the international humanitarian law. Again, the election is not a substitute for a national dialogue. President Bashir, if he goes to elections, and he is going for elections in April, he will go alone. All the political forces, including Turabi, who are supporting the 7+7 group, now decline to go into election. Qazi Salahuddin signed with Sadiq al-Mahdi 4 or 5 days ago, and they are also boycotting the elections. The SRF is boycotting the elections. The Umma Party is boycotting the election. The Communist Party is boycotting the elections. So elections is just an extension of the rule of the Bashir. It is not option. The real options is the national dialogue. Why the national dialogue and the national constitution conference is a correct path? Because we, in the absence of this national dialogue, we will ending having a popular, a peaceful uprising. This is an option. The continuations of the armed struggle, and for them to converge together, and the continuation of the status quo. The continuation of the status quo is not an option. It will lead Sudan to collapse, as happened in Iraq, in Yemen. It is a recipe for disaster. So what is the way forward? And there are a lot of details. You can get them in my written presentations. We believe that the way forward, first of all, we have to understand the situation correctly in Sudan. And given the present international situation, that it is not possible to move things in the Security Council. Though there are many resolutions from Security Council about Darfur, there is the 24/6 resolutions on the two areas, on opening the access and reaching and ending the war. But those resolutions are not working because of the stalemate in Security Council, that there is no political will due to the new factor of Russia, China, and other countries in the Security Council. So we believe that the internal dynamics are more important than any other dynamics. And we are going to develop the situation in Sudan ourselves. And we believe that there is a wider discontent. The economy is very bad. President Bashir in the annual budget is actually using 70% of the more than 70% of the annual budget on security, war, and spending of the presidential spending. Less than 2% are being spent for health and education. And you can see this situation, which clearly indicates that Sudan is a failed state. How a state could use 70%. Actually, Sudan government is the only government in Africa today that is using extensively their air force to combat the civilian populations. So in these situations, the way out is to have a clear plan that will support the democratic forces, that will support the Sudan call, and that will put a strong pressure on the government in Khartoum, and that will need the regional actors, the neighboring countries of Sudan, the IGAD, and the African Union, and the international community, especially the Troika, and Norway is one of the countries of the Troika, to have a very clear plan on how to put pressure on General Bashir. That election is not a solution, and election is not going to be recognized by the international community, and that the national dialogue reach the point of no return in order for President Bashir to go for General Bashir to go into a serious, credible national dialogue. He will go to the elections. Election will not solve problem, will increase problem, and he knows that. When he talked about the national dialogue, he talked about the national dialogue because of two factors: the uprising of September, October 2013, where the government killed more than 200 young people, women, and the youth of Sudan. They were killed in the street of Khartoum and other cities because they were peacefully demonstrating against the government. They were shot with a live bullet in their chest, in their head, openly. If you go to the internet, you will find a lot of recording on what took place in Khartoum. Again, after the SRF made the Abkarshola joint operations, so Bashir sees that the demand for change is high, and instead of him responding positively for change, he wear the hat of change, and he said to everybody, I'm ready to change, and I'm offering national dialogue. Now he did not deliver on the national dialogue. Issues of Sudan are not going to wither away because of an isolated election that the government is going in. So in this regard, we see the way forward is for the international community, for us to put more pressure on the regime, is either for the regime to go for a credible national dialogue, which can resolve the issues of the country, which can resolve actually the issue of Bashir himself. Because Bashir, if he wants to resolve his own issue to have a good legacy, the ICC, he needs a dialogue with the Sudanese people. He needs a justice that will be prescribed by this National Constitutional Conference. Otherwise, the status quo will lead Sudan to collapse. And for us to preserve Sudan not to collapse, that's why the opposition, they came together. They offer a very clear resolutions to resolve the Sudan problem. On one hand, we are ready for a comprehensive, holistic approach that will bring a comprehensive peaceful settlement through a national constitutional process. Short of that, if the government decided to continue what it is doing now, then there will be an uprising to change the regime. It is the choices for the regime. They will either change or we will change them. And we believe that the role of Norway in the humanitarian side is important, and developing it to end the war is important. And as part of the Troika, what are they going to do with the other African countries, with the AUHIB, to give a clear message that this election is not going to solve the problem of Sudan, and the only solution is the national dialogue. Thank you very much, and I will leave the time for you to interact.
Thank you very much, Yasir. I believe this will certainly give Gunnar an opportunity to comment, and also for others to ask questions. So I will give immediately the word to Gunnar for some perspectives on this speech.
Thank you, Øystein, and thank you, Yasir. Let me begin by saying that as foreigners, and therefore not party to any of the Sudanese conflicts, and there are many. We should be a bit humble when it comes to suggesting solutions or ways forward, particularly when we realize that the longer conflicts last, the more complex they tend to become, and therefore extremely hard to manage. And if we had the solution and there was sufficient will to apply them, we would not have been having this meeting today. Therefore, I can only volunteer to make some observations on the political developments as I see them at the moment. There is often a sense of déjà vu when it comes to Sudanese politics. There is a Sudanese saying that politics is different every week, but if you come back after 10 years, it is exactly the same. One of the enduring features of Sudanese politics, as I see it, is this peculiar combination of a dominating center in Khartoum, yet this center is prone to fractious politics, new alliances, then splitting, and then alliances again. And this is also reflected in the peripheries, like in Darfur, where nobody seems to be able to count the number of rebel movements at one particular point in time. Alex de Waal called this feature of Sudanese politics for perpetual disturbance or perpetual turbulence. And it has led to, of course, a lot of mistrust, bad faith, dishonored agreements, and so on, which makes things very difficult because this mistrust has been increasing over the years. A second observation is that from the mid-80s until 2011 and the secession of South Sudan, the Sudanese politics was dominated, or the whole period was dominated by two different state-building projects: those of the central government and those and the SPLM. And the SPLM succeeded in making their own state, whereas other so-called marginalized populations in Darfur, in the Blue Nile, in southern Kordofan, eastern Sudan, did not have a unified leadership on par with the two main power blocs. They were pulled in different directions by ethno-regional elites, allied sometimes with the government, sometimes with SPLM, and local and regional leaders across lines joined the government, or they defected from the government and joined the opposition, or they joined rebel forces. When the Sudan Revolutionary Front was established in late 2011, there was reason to believe that things would change. It brought together factions of the SPLM North, the major rebel groups in Darfur, particularly the GEM and the SLA, and also other groups, smaller groups in South Kordofan and the Blue Nile. Then, as we know, and as Yasir has indicated, the SRF joined with representatives of the National Consensus Forces, a coalition of opposition parties, to sign the New Dawn Charter, as it was called, which advocates an inclusive transitional government. And that this transition should be secured either by non-violent, preferably by non-violent, if not by violent means. These new constellations, as I see them, they do not come easy in the Sudan. When the SRF was established, you issued a document called as Restructuring the Sudanese State. And it argued not only in favor of a transitional period of 6 years, but also a well-known argument in Sudan, separation of religion and the state. But also, importantly, the principle of voluntary unity. If you cannot go along with us, a unified state, you should be, wherever in Kordofan or in Darfur, be allowed to secede from this state. And as we know, this created tensions between the different parties who had signed different agreements. Particularly the Ummah party at the time had reservation and still has reservations about the issue of religion and the state, but also this concept of voluntary unity. After all, we have lost South Sudan. Should we lose another part of our territory? And we are, after all, not anti-Islamic, and we are not secularists. So this issue of religion of the state is problematic, as we know. That has been so for a long time. It has also led to reformulations that religious institutions should be separate from state institutions, and there is a movement on this. But putting armed rebellion and unarmed political opposition on the same level has continued to create some tensions in the Sudan. But as Yasir Arman told us, there has been new developments with the so-called Sudan Call recently, where major opposition forces and representatives of the civil society met and again signed a statement. So the question is there a real chance of an alliance between rebels and the unarmed political opposition in Khartoum, or mainly the rather traditional political parties in Khartoum? What should reduce the chances of this broader deal? Well, one thing is the posture by the government and the actions by the government, the threats by the government, and the other would be, and importantly for this discussion, the differences or the continuing differences between the SRF and many opposition parties, whether they can be completely overcome. The government strategy has been to reject the legitimacy of the Sudan Revolutionary Front, and also to keep separate negotiation tracts. This is a long discussion also in Sudan, a feature of the history of Sudan, this issue of whether it has been a tremendous mistake all the time to have separate tracts for discussing Darfur or for discussing South Kordofan, Blue Nile, and then another track for discussions with the traditional parties in Khartoum. In this situation, there would seem to be two possible scenarios. And I think in your paper you have outlined these scenarios. One would be that we have a continuing, it would be wrong to call it stalemate, because as I said, it changes every week. And you mentioned this fact with the constitutional amendments. But at the same time, there are these continuities. Muddling through, it could some people have called it muddling through, but and it will end up by UN calling it low intensity conflicts, as it has started to call what's happening in Darfur. But it means problems of achieving any developments in the country, which, and of course, in the end, disastrous for everybody. It could lead to a situation like in Yemen these days. When I meet taxi drivers or professors at the university, they are warning against the Somalia situation, but recently they have also been talking about the situations like in Yemen, and even President Bashir has talked about and warned against situations like in Yemen. The other scenario is, of course, to go for a negotiated settlement through a national dialogue, as you advocate, which includes a dialogue on the constitutional process. Given the deep divisions in Sudanese societies, also the remaining divisions in the oppositions, I agree that this is the best mechanism to bring forth a national consensus. The question, of course, is, and you again have discussed this, whether the prospects for this are promising or not. The opposition argues that the government is not serious, and during the last week they have used as evidence the parliamentary decision to amend the constitutions, regularizing the Rapid Reaction Force, as they are called, having appointed governors, and also include the Doha document for Darfur in the constitution. The opposition will argue that this is evidence that the government is not so interested in discussing constitutional developments. Also, the international environment may not be very enabling, to use a term which the World Bank used for the economy in the 90s, whether we have an enabling environment or not. Just a few weeks ago, the International Criminal Court decided to suspend the efforts to pursue the case against President Bashir in Sudan. The so-called international community is concerned with developments elsewhere, which are very dramatic in many countries. And there may even be an unstated policy in the US, although I have no evidence, that one should not rock the boat because of the fear of the consequences in terms of possible fragmentation, possible situation like we have seen in some of the neighboring countries. On the other hand, and this will be my final words actually, we should always, and the April election, as you said, is clearly a major hurdle. We should always try to look for positive movements or positive trends, if any. There are conciliatory moves, such as the deal between the SPLM North and the Saihoun, and then the government regarding the exchange of prisoners of war. There are actually dialogues and discussions going on in different places in the world between different groups, both belonging to the government, other Islamic groups, other parts of the political spectrum. So there is a beginning of a dialogue between various groups in the country. And I think there is, if any progress is made, it will depend on the will and ability to go beyond what is happening in the media, what is propagated in the media, and both media attacks and counterattacks in the media by the government and against the government, where one could quietly continue to explore underlying and controversial issues, like the issue of the role of the religion and the state. So the issue is this, or the big question is this: are we at the crossroads or are we not at the crossroads? Are we at the point where it cannot continue like this? Or are we still in a situation where, yes, it can? In the book that we edited and published 1 year ago now, that come out recently, we argue that we think that Sudan is at the crossroads, and various parties, also in the government, says that yes, this is an important point in time. But sometimes going back to the Sudanese saying, one worries that the situation may, or the current turbulence may continue. Everybody seems to agree that there is a need for transformation, and a lot of people seem to be saying that this transformation needs to be based on rethinking conventional ways of managing diversity that moves Sudan in directions which have never been tried before. But the issue is this: are we now approaching this moment in time where we see real prospects for this, or will we have another long period of confrontational politics where unfortunately also violence escalates and humanitarian crisis will, of course, as a result, continue to escalate? Thank you.